All right, all good. All right, over to you, Peter.
Hey, hello everybody, and welcome very much to our launch for the climate fiction or cli-fi of the Anthropocene. So this is a really exciting event that the Australian Journal of Environmental Education likes to offer as a way to celebrate our community, to celebrate that we've come together to think around an important part or an important contribution to the field, and that we want to share the value, the effort, the intent of working in new and interesting spaces across our field. So today we are taking a moment, a bit of a pause to celebrate some fabulous publications. I'm very excited to see some of our publications appear online this morning, and just really enthusiastic about our issue coming out. A quick shout out though, our issue isn't actually published as an issue yet, but this is coming, so hold tight. I think by the end of the week, we should have our full issue in publication form. And finally, just a quick congratulations to everyone for contributing to this special issue as authors, as reviewers, and a special shout out to the guest editors. So beautifully led by Joseph Ferguson, wonderfully including Cassandra Teitler, and Susan Oliver. We're really pleased to have been a strong team to pull this really diverse and dynamic issue together. And today, I hope you appreciate the breadth of what we've been able to do in this space. And it makes such a significant contribution to our field of environmental education. And I think that in itself is very exciting. As we get going today, I'd love to take up our Australian tradition towards reconciliation to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're gathering. Dislocated from Australia right now, I'm not in the country, so it's been a very interesting experience sharing our strategies towards reconciliation in an international context. And it just has really helped me appreciate how important our processes are. And I'd like to invite you to acknowledge the country that you're currently on in the chat. And as we pay respects to our traditional custodians of these unceded lands, and especially acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues that might be with us here today, and appreciating elders past and present. So with that, Joe, I would love to hand back to you to lead us through the day.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. So, welcome everyone to the launch event for our special issue on cli-fi in AJEE. And firstly, I'm Joe Ferguson, so I was one of the guest editors, and Peter's already spoken, and so Peter was part of the team. And I wanted to also quickly throw to Cass Tyler to introduce herself as part of the team.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Cassandra Teitler. I'm a creative practice researcher, and I was really happy to be invited to be an associate editor for this special issue in particular, because of course cli-fi in its essence is speculative, and as an arts, as I have my own arts practice, I think that it can offer different ways or extended ways of thinking about environmental educational pedagogy, and looking at things through that lens offers so much. So yeah, hello there everyone.
Thanks, Cass. And I'm not sure if Susan's here at the moment.
I should be, Joe. Can you
Oh, you
see me?
are. I can.
Yeah,
Thanks, Susan. Do
yeah.
you want to introduce yourself?
Hi. Hi, everyone. Joe, I didn't catch that.
Oh, just do you want to give a quick intro of yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Oliver, and I have the pleasure of being one of the co-editors of this fantastic collection. I am so pleased with your contributions and your essays, and I learned so much reading them. I think it's a fantastic collection. I teach environmental literature and climate fiction at the University of Essex in the UK. In fact, I started a climate fiction module last year at master's level, and it recruited 20 students immediately. Now, I don't know what your master's classes are like, but 20 students is a lot to have in one class at master's level over here in the UK. So I was thrilled to be involved in the collection, and wonderful time working with my co-editors. Hi, I don't know if I should really say any more and just hand over to other people to say something about what they've done. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Joe,
Thanks a lot,
Cass,
Susan.
and Peter.
And yeah, just quickly, Peter and I are based at Deakin. We work with the science education team and also in climate change, environmental education. So just a bit of background there. So this is the program for today. So the way we've organised it is we've invited a few sort of contributors to the three different sections that make up the special issue. So those manuscripts look at sort of theory around CLI-FI, those that look at the way that CLI-FI has and can be used sort of within environmental education context, and then those manuscripts that explored more the generation of CLI-FI artifacts in themselves. And so, yeah, the idea is that we'll have sort of two presentations per section, and then each of those will be followed by a sort of a 10-minute discussion period. Just an apology from Michaela Saunders. Michaela was obviously really looking forward to coming along to this event, but unfortunately she's had sort of something come up at the last minute. So just wanted to pass on her apology there. So the other thing I wanted to mention was that, as Peter said, the SI isn't formally published yet, but you can actually access the manuscripts in the SI as a collection on the AJEE website. So that's a way of accessing those now as in first view. And very soon the editorial will appear as part of that as well. So we've written an editorial that provides an overview of what's in the SI and gives a rundown, sort of each contribution in each of those sections. So yeah, that's worth checking out as well. So without any further delay, I wanted to sort of commence our first set of presentations, so to speak, looking at the theory of CLI-FI. So Jo O'Mara is going to kick us off. She'll chat to us about her experiences working with Glenn Auld. Over to you, Jo.
I'll just turn my audio on. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jo O'Mara, and I work with Jo and Peter and Glenn and probably other people as well. I used to work with Annette at Deakin University, and we're sort of located in the land of the Eastern Kulin Nations in Melbourne, Australia, for those of you from overseas who see it like that. And one of the things I think that has been really important for us here in thinking about these relationships between decolonising ourselves and also decolonising our approaches towards thinking of the environment as being for extraction and the environment as being there to serve our purposes has been to think about what is it to live in a settler colonial state, and how can we move forward towards justice, reconciliation for country and for First Nations people. So I'm a language and literacy academic, and I chair secondary English teaching method or curriculum inquiry, and I read a lot of fiction. And I particularly read a lot of Australian fiction, and I also read quite a lot of climate fiction across all of these genres. So obviously I majored in literature as an undergrad, and have always kept up that reading. And, the amount of climate fiction that's being produced in Australia is really huge. It's one of the biggest things that, if you look at all the genres, it's just increasing exponentially. And I suppose for me personally, as someone who comes from that literature and linguistics background, one of the first things about decolonisation that I like to think about is that before the colonisation by the English here, there were 240 languages and 270 different dialects of those languages that were in existence. And often when we think about the literature, we think of it as being Australian literature in English, and that is what the genre is. But obviously it has been something which has occurred through time, and for a long period of time. So when we came to write this paper, I was saying to Glenn, oh my God, what we have to do is just narrow it down, and we'll just do some of the climate fiction from the last 3 years. I'm going, praiseworthy, Alexis Wright, we'll do, and I'm naming about 10 things. And so we started looking at all of these things, and then we thought we don't have time for that. We have to just choose one novel, run with it. And so making the choice to do Diriwada Rise Up by Anita Heiss was one which we made in terms of multiple things that it provided as a novel. And also we felt like it was quite an accessible novel, that many people would be able to read it, and that it would be really great to use in schools, and that environmental educators would be able to pick it up, and there would be things that they could use to show some of the impacts of colonisation on the environment. And one of the things that I really love about the shaping of the novel is that it begins with Mother Earth speaking, and that sort of bookends the way that Anita Heiss has constructed the novel. And within that, it sort of contains some of the colonial violence, but it also contains positionalities which show the way that invasion has begun, sort of erosion of the landscape, the way that it started to kind of destroy natural patterns and, contribute to climate change. So I thought I might read one of the lines from it. I'm just going to read like 2 lines, which we put into the paper. And it says, "The journey of the white ghost to conquer me for their own purposes will be devastating. But when the warrior Windrading commands Dirai Wayada, his people will rise up." So the novel also has some story of colonial violence and First Nation people standing up for themselves and for the landscape. And so this, can you hear my daughter singing in the background? No.
Can't hear.
That's all right.
Zoom blocks it out, Joe, like background noise at the setting. Yeah.
Sorry, it's really loud. Anyway, so that sort of positionality, I think, is something that's really important. And as we wrote the paper, we chose some sections where it was showing the impacts of just the first moments of colonisation and the way that immediately began to change things. So weeds, feral animals, sort of all of those things which have been so devastating in Australia and have really reduced the numbers of, native animals, but also the clearing of the land, the building of roads. And one of the things I wanted to say in my 8 minutes, which is probably almost over, is reading this fiction and really thinking about it, especially First Nations fiction, has really changed the way that I, as an individual, relate to the landscape, because constantly imagining that perspective, that point of view, those first moments when things were done to the soil, to the land, to the waterways, it actually makes me walk around and think, what was this like before? What have we done? And I suppose when we did this article, it took Glenn and I a long time to work out. We have this paragraph where we have all the metres of roads. We tried to measure how many roads there were in Australia. And it's kind of a bit irrelevant really to the article. And it took us about 2 days to do. And then I said, those of you who know Glenn will find this really funny because he's actually a maths teacher by trade. I said, Glenn, I think this number's wrong. And he goes, no. And that we're sort of having this big conversation. But since we spent all that time thinking about it, I just can't help but every time I see a road, I just feel it as this violation. And I'm someone who's driven a car since I was 18. I drive all the time. But it's made me really think about that kind of contribution that all of us are making all the time to climate change in those actions, and how before settlement, colonization, industrialization, it was people walking on the landscape. So it would have made a path, but it certainly didn't disrupt all of human nature. And I think that is one of the things that you get from fiction. You might know the facts, but sort of living in the world and seeing it from the perspective of the characters and imagining those moments, that is actually the transformative power of the empathy of taking on someone's point of view. And it helps you to recast how you see the world. And the facts are important as well, but the two things together, I think, can really help to shift the way that we move in the world and what we see. Anyway, that's the end for me.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks so
It's
much.
long enough.
Thank you. And Peter's popped the link in there to the Padlet. So if you've got any sort of reflections or thoughts around what Jo was sharing, please put those in there. And then we'll just jump to Chantal and Hasti in a second, and then we'll have an opportunity for a discussion. So now I wanted to welcome Chantal and Hasti to share their, I guess, reflections and thoughts around their paper, Cli-Fi as Climate Change Education, a post-humanist, eco-feminist approach to thinking with the Australian Cli-Fi narrative. So I'll pass over to Chantal and Hasti now, and I'll also pop a link to their manuscript in the chat there.
Thanks so much, Jo, and thanks to the editors and Peter for putting this special issue together. Is it all right if I just share? I've just got a couple of slides to help keep me focused for 8 minutes.
Certainly. Yeah, no worries.
All right, hopefully you can see those. So before I talk a bit about the paper, I just wanted to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded lands of the Yugambeh peoples, and Hasti's on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung peoples. So we wanted in this paper to think about what Australian Cli-Fi could contribute to climate change education. And in looking at Australian Cli-Fi, we thought it was interesting that for a place so highly dependent on fossil fuels that, Cli-Fi was having such a boom at the moment here. And we could also see in the text that while there were some that were, telling stories that reinforce colonial worldviews and patriarchal logics and centered anthropocentrism, we could also see a lot of texts that had climate justice at the center of them. And so we've picked two of those texts in our paper. We're looking at Alexis Wright's The Swan Book and Melinda Bobbis' Locust Girl, and just to give you a sense of how they sort of fit into a little bit of the Cli-Fi that's being produced here, with obviously a lot coming out in just the last couple of years. In the paper, we're arguing that Cli-Fi texts such as these two provide us with an opportunity to engage in discussions of climate beyond the scientific, and within an interdisciplinary higher education curriculum that Cli-Fi can foster creativity, empathy, and critical thinking, very similar to what Jo was saying, and also bring together the scientific, the ecological literacy, with an ethical responsibility. We took an eco-critical analysis approach to these texts, informed by post-humanist theory and ecofeminist theory. And we used a kind of post-qualitative method. So we read the text and we had discussions about the text. And from those discussions came, oh, sorry, I'm not changing my slides, am I? From those discussions, we came up with some questions and some concepts that we then reread the text through. So as you all know, current models of climate change education are very science dominated. And the risk of this is that we can start to treat climate as a wholly technical problem, and sort of miss those more cultural and ethical dimensions, as well as focus more on Western science and forget about other ways of knowing, including Indigenous and Southern ways. And so literature and art can foster an ethical imagination and lead to some of those transformative learning experiences. And I will just talk about these two texts. So the first text that we chose is written by Melinda Bobbis, who's a Filipino-Australian author. And it tells the story of Amadia, a young girl who's residing in a refugee-style camp in a future desertscape. And she has an interesting relationship with locusts. The bulk of the story, she actually has a locust embedded in her body. And not only does that kind of blur those boundaries between the human and non-human in the narrative, but it also kind of repositions the human and the locust. So a locust is often maligned as a creature that strips whole farms of food that humans intend to eat. In the narrative, it's really the humans who kind of strip whole landscapes and create that desert while hoarding resources in the city. And so we thought that this narrative was particularly rich to think through, some of those political and cultural and social dimensions of climate that we see playing out, particularly around things like refugee politics and political myth-making around resources. And the second book that we talked about was the Swan book. Alexis Wright is a one-year woman, and as Jo mentioned, with Praiseworthy, she now has 3 narratives that we might consider to be part of the cli-fi genre. Praiseworthy, I think, is up for the International Climate Fiction Award this year and has won lots of other awards. But the Swan book tells of a young woman who's sort of forced to leave her swamp home and taken to the city as the promised wife of the first Aboriginal Australian Prime Minister. And all the kind of hopes of this Prime Minister are kind of fall away as he enacts the same kinds of colonial violence as previous governments have. In this future world, there's a lot of flooding, and waters are kind of everywhere in the text. And there's also a scarcity of things like electricity in the future world. And so again, there's a lot here that we can unpack in terms of the colonial and the political, and how that impacts inequality and climate justice. So these are the sorts of questions that we were asking as we were reading through these texts. How do texts challenge anthropocentric and patriarchal logics? How do locusts, swans, waters, and other more than humans in the text act as narrative agents? And how do these stories open justice-oriented climate education pathways? And so as we were reading, we came up with some concepts that spoke to us of climate change. The first was eco-sociocultural transformation. So the two protagonists in the stories don't just accept and adapt to their kind of oppressive situations, but they become agents of change throughout the narrative. We also see this kind of notion of belonging extended to the more than human. So both of the protagonists have these kinds of communities that they create with more than human others. And hope was another one. So they both at first appear to be dystopias, but we see this kind of ending that opens up hope through logics of care and renewal. And of course, there's a heavy emphasis on kind of Anthropocene narratives here. There's a lot of critique of extractivist logics and competition for resources. And we see those kinds of emergence of more relational ontologies as we go on. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chantal. Thanks a lot. So yeah, we've got some time now to have a sort of chat, a discussion around what Joe and Chantal have sort of presented. And so you might have questions, you might have reflections on your own if you were a contributor to the special issue, or if you're joining us and you're interested in Cli-Fi, so it's pretty open. And there's also some thoughts being shared in the Padlet as well, sort of some comments and some questions. So I'll basically just sort of throw it open to people to sort of ask questions or make comments. You might have questions for Joe or Chantal, as I said, or you might sort of have some other ideas in relations to how we've sort of kicked off looking at, in some way, sort of conceptualizing, what is Cli-Fi with these sort of two contributions. Would anyone like to start us off?
I mean, I can start with one thing. So I think what Chantal was saying was really important, that a lot of climate fiction will end up with some form of hope or some kind of idea of the collective. And that sort of covers, as you were talking, I was thinking about things I'd read over the past few years. And I think that is a really important factor, because a lot of fiction will have those concepts as part of the resolution. And when you're working with young people, often they look at, the statistics, they look at what's happening, and it just feels really kind of hopeless. And so one of the things that fiction can do is emotionally help to face it, but also to kind of provide some way of thinking through it emotionally, I suppose.
I'm really interested in this idea of hope, that sort of the differences between something that you can experience and then feel respite and then not driven to action, and the difference with that and productive hope, and where does that lie? Because it's something I think about within my own work, and something, I think within a number of these conversations we've been having, as well as this idea of utopia and how problematic a term like utopia can be. And so, yeah, I just guess I'm throwing that idea open. Where can hope be productive, and still, yeah, actually a call to action while not completely destroying everyone to never leave the house?
I love these essays. Can you see me and can you hear me? Because I think my
Yeah.
image was not showing earlier, but I really love these contributions, and thank you both, Joe and Chantel and Glenn. When I taught my Cli-Fi Masters class last year, I had one student in particular who said, "But this fiction is also depressing." And in fact, the other members of the class said, "Well, no, it isn't, because there are people at the end and they find ways of dealing with this, or they're looking at ways they can deal with the situations." I think that matter of hope, and of exploring new ways of thinking forward. And Chantel, your essay does that with its exploration of the boundaries between the human and the animal. No, we need to think in new ways about solving old problems, and not just go on in the same track of thinking, well, people can solve everything if they just apply themselves to what's going wrong. I really love both the essays. Joe, that the attention to roads is brilliant, and you'll see that I've put in the Padlet that the lines you use in your essay where you talk about the crushed rock, it sort of immediately made me wince. Not just the boundaries between the human and the animal, but between humans and the mineral environment around them as well, and very important for climate change, and brought out really well in your essay. So thank you. Thanks both.
Thanks. And of course, that idea of extraction, of the earth being there for extraction and extractive purposes. And I think what Anita Heiss does in her work, and certainly in Alexis Wright's work, that kind of idea of, the relationality between people and the earth, and First Nations Australians having a very, very different sort of conceptual framework around that, which is not extractive.
Yeah, Hasti, you have your hand up there. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I also think like what we've been doing in this paper is to argue that like climate fiction in education can move the students beyond like fear-based responses, because that's what usually happens when you talk about climate fiction and just the things that are happening around that. It can open that kind of justice-oriented or imaginative pathways that we can have to confront the climate crisis. And in general, I think hope in climate fiction can kind of invite that collective action. It can invite like ethical responsibility or creativity, and help us see literature not just as a tool to raise awareness, but also something that can inspire transformation. And I think that is what we need when we talk about climate change in general.
Thanks, Hasti.
Thank you.
Any other sort of comments or questions or reflections before we move on to our next sort of set of papers? If you've got any other ideas, feel free to put those in the Padlet as well as we sort of progress through the rest of the event.
Actually, I did have one little question. Apologies, this is my second time speaking.
Oh, good, Cass. Go ahead.
But just very quickly, Joe, I loved your description of the roads, and actually the difference with walking through a place rather than walking upon it, or not walking, sorry, rolling very fast upon it. I thought that was really lovely, and I just love to hear a tiny bit more about the translanguaging that you spoke about in your paper, and how that works to bring country as a being unto itself. I'd just love to hear you just speak a tiny bit more
Sure.
about that.
I wasn't very theoretical in this. So translanguaging is when people work between two languages. And so often if someone has a particular language, like my first language is English, and if I was learning a second language like French, I would probably speak with English words within the way I would speak French if I moved to France. And so it's about people working across languages. And in this book, Anita Heiss has studied her own language, her First Nations language, which is a second language to her. And she's only beginning to learn Wiradjuri. And what she's done is incorporated those words into the text. And part of what it does is, because the grammar is different and the way that things are conceptualized in the language, it actually changes your orientation towards the earth or towards the relationships between the people, because the depth of and the ways in which it's positioned is different. And so one of the things I really noticed is we would always say the earth or the environment. We would use we would write it like that because we see it as a thing. Whereas when you have in your language earth as like a being and as that sort of positionality, it actually changes the grammatical construction of the text, because that relationship which we signify through grammar is signified differently when the relationship itself is different. And so it's quite interesting. Things that occur in the text actually are not just an act of translation, but they show the depth and the differences in the relationship. So, and that sort of language revival movement of the 270 languages, 700 variations, is something which First Nation people here have really tried to bring to life, because part of the erasure of the British colonists was to also erase language and to, do the typical thing of English of being a colonizing kind of language and erasing the other languages and the other positionings. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. So we might move on. So thanks again to Joe, Glenn, Chantal, and Hasti for their contributions to the SI. As I mentioned, so we'll move now on to looking at some contributions that explored the use of Cli-Fi as part of sort of education, environmental education. And I mentioned that Michaela's not able to be here, but I wanted to obviously encourage everyone to engage with Michaela's work. So Michaela's article is titled "Reading Climate Fiction and Non-Fiction Through First Nations Cultural Genre Theory." And so I'll just put in the link to that in the chat in there, and encourage everyone to engage with that important work. And then I wanted to now introduce Auntie A. Jacobs to explore or share with us her contribution to the SI. So speculating with other than human and multi-species climate fiction, canopy of the hidden alley. So Auntie, I'll pass over to you to share your experiences as part of working in this SI.
Yes, thank you so much, Joe, and thank you for everyone being here. I'm very excited to be part of this special issue. When I saw this special issue coming around, I was like, yeah, that's a really nice pace to start thinking about, connected to my research. So yeah, just a lovely opportunity to start thinking with climate fiction for me a bit more. I prepared some slides, so I'll be sharing my screen. And I think you're supposed to see the slides now. Yes, okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, my name is Antje. And I'm doing a PhD at the moment at the University of Melbourne and at KU Leuven. So I'm actually calling in from Belgium right now. And in my research, I'm looking into how we can imagine multi-species worlds, basically, and what we can learn from the practice of imagining multi-species world to think about climate change. And so, yeah, when this special issue came around, I hadn't really been thinking about climate fiction, weirdly enough, actually. I had been thinking more of multi-species arts, and then I was more concentrated on the visual arts. So how do visual arts kind of reimagine how humans and other inhumans engage with one another? And so this special issue really allowed me to look into climate fiction. And so in the article that I wrote, it's called Speculating with Other Inhumans and Multi-Species Climate Fiction. I started thinking of, okay, so what is multi-species cli-fi? So I consider multi-species cli-fi as a branch of climate fiction that specifically addresses the relationality between humans and other inhumans, in the context of climate change and speculative climate futures. And so to explore this a bit further, I thought, why not write a climate fiction story or a multi-species climate fiction story myself? And in the process of doing that, thinking through the potentialities of what multi-species cli-fi can do when thinking of climate change. And so I wrote the story Canopy of the Hidden Alley, which I will show you a little snippet of at the end of the presentation. But so through the writing of the story, I could theorize what it is to speculate with other inhumans. And so speculating with can be understood as a relational practice, something related to what Donna Haraway called becoming with. So it's not only just telling or writing a story about other inhumans, but it's the process of writing it or the process of reading through your own writings can be a way of co-evolving with the other inhumans in the story. And so the story didn't just emerge at once, obviously, but it is based on the research that I'm doing in my PhD. And so last year, as part of my PhD, I visited Australia. And so I organized some workshops in Australia, which were called the Multi-Species City Labs. And this multi-species city lab actually took a research creation methodological approach, which means that it combines artistic exploration or artistic creations with like what is more understood in academia as scholarly investigation. And so in research creation, you don't just start studying something that already exists, like a phenomenon or, I don't know, an artifact maybe, but it's more about creating something, and then the thing that you create is part of the investigation that you're doing, basically. And so in the multi-species city lab workshops, the things that we are creating are multi-species imaginaries. So I did this multi-species city lab in 3 Australian cities. So 3 workshops in 3 cities, and in each city, participants were invited to just reimagine the city from a multi-species perspective. So I invited city residents, scholars, and artists to do that. And then the starting prompt was, how can humans and other inhumans collaborate in the city to address climate challenges? And this resulted in imaginaries that came up, and these took the form of visual artwork. So people started visualizing their imaginaries by drawing or by collaging or sculpting their imaginaries. And then at the end, they also wrote a small or short fiction story. So this is a little bit of what that looked like in practice. On the left side, you see some of the artworks that were created, and then you also see a video that shows more of the material process of imagining multi-species cities, basically. And so the story that I wrote for the special issue, Canopy of the Hidden Alley, it's not just a representation of what participants imagined, translated into a story, but I used speculative fiction as a methodological tool to engage further with participants, what participants created. So it's not really representing, it's more a creative continuation because it's not, it's the story combines my own imagination with the imagination of participants. And so I did use the imagination of participants as kind of propositions to engage in further. And there are elements of the workshops in the story as well. And then I engage with it with my imagination as well. So yeah, that's a bit of the context of the story, the climate fiction story that I wrote. And I would just like to end my presentation with reading a snippet out loud, which you also see on the screen. So this is actually the start of the story, and it goes as follows. Interaction registered. It's an easy one to overlook. I pass it every day on my way to work, but today, with the morning sun, a flicker of blue movement at the edge of the sidewalk caught my eye. My sensors prickle, an unfamiliar static feeling crawling along my hand. A connection request? I haven't had one in months, not since the accident. I step into the alley, and a wave of discomfort crawls upon me. The darkness is thick, and my instincts murmur warnings. A dark, abandoned alley in the middle of the city. It's not the best place to wander around by yourself as a woman. But look at that canopy. It's living. How have I missed this place for years? Every day, the same route, the same streets, and yet I have never noticed this alley before. There it is. My hand lights up. A request. I take a step closer, observing, trying to make out a form, but the alley is impossibly dark, swallowing the morning sun. Looking up, I notice how the blue canopy stretches overhead, blocking out the sky. Just a few shimmers slip through, scattering the ground in fractured light. In between the tangled branches, small orange worms light up. Hearing the writing of their red bodies against one another make me shiver. Is this disgust? I lean in, just slightly, but nothing. The canopy doesn't spark any memories, no recognition. Strange. I'll have to check my memory file when I get home. Perhaps the connection with the server is weak here. The system surely has some details about her, her origin, a record, something to help me decide if I can trust her. As my hand nears the structure, her damp and warm body immediately connects to mine. My hand flushes purple. The air around me seems to thicken, humid and heavy. My hand darkens, deep blue now, then pain, a sharp cramping pulse. Something's wrong. I pull away to recover, my fingers stiff, but no steam. Decline request. So this is only a short start of the story, and if you'd like to read more, I guess you'd have to go to the article. But basically, the story is about a human, but as you already noticed, there are some other than human elements to the protagonist as well, who they come into a strange alley and they discover this living canopy that they want to connect to, but it is dangerous to connect to for certain reasons. And so it's like a back and forth of, should I connect with the canopy or not? What are my chances of building a strong relationship with the canopy, or actually, getting into trouble because of connecting to another than human. So yeah, that's it for me, I guess. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Antje, for sharing your manuscript and your sort of thoughts on that in relation to the SI. And we've got some some sort of questions and ideas in the Padlet again. So we've got some time now to again have a sort of discussion, chat around anyone else who's here who contributed perhaps to that sort of section of the SI around generating CliFi and how that fits specifically within sort of environmental climate change ed context. And it was nice to see, obviously there's sort of lots of different threads running through the SI, but sort of particularly around post-humanism and how we're actually able to decenter the human and connect with systems beyond the human, and including through processes of storing. So I think that's particularly nice aspect of the SI. So again, open up to everyone to have a chat, have a discussion around your ideas here, and we've got the Padlet there as well.
So I didn't want to jump in, but I do have a burning question, Antje, for you, which is I was lucky to be at one of your workshops in Perth, Boorloo, and I know that you also did them in Brisbane and Melbourne, and so I'm sort of interested in it's, maybe the answer is no, nothing, but did you notice any differences in the urban, I guess, fictionalizing or imagining in these different places? Or was there, it was quite similar?
That's a great question, actually. I did notice some differences between the different places, and it's also something that I have been thinking about a lot, of this idea of emplaced imagination. When looking into the different cities in Australia, what I noticed is that the other inhumans that were included in the imaginaries were very different. And I think that also has to do with the ecosystems in each city being different as well. Like for the workshop in Brisbane, in the city landscape of Brisbane, there are a lot of birds. I think they are ibises, or I don't know how to pronounce them. Yeah. So it was really interesting to see that they also entered the imagination and the multi-species reimaginations of the urban spaces that participants brought forward. And then it's not only the other inhumans that were brought in that differed, but it's also the climate challenges that participants wanted to address or imagine about. Because in Brisbane, I feel like that lots to do with heat waves, or just the heat waves, the urban heat island effect. And then in Perth, there were a lot of groups that also looked into water issues. So I feel like the climate challenges and the other inhumans that were part of the imaginations really differed. And maybe to extend that, but this was not part of this article, I also did the workshops in Belgium, which of course is also quite different from Australia. And then in this more on this scale, I feel like in Australia, what was very apparent is that colonial history and a settler colonial present were always part of the imaginations that came forward, basically, which was not the case in Belgium. And so I've been thinking with this idea of how emplaced speculation also not only addresses local ecosystems or local environments and local climate challenges, but also histories. These kind of matters of place, of history, structures were really apparent in those imaginaries as well.
I've just looking at the Padlet, there was a question here which I thought was very interesting around love these contributions, wondering about the relationship between transhuman and multi-species. Not sure who posted that or whether they want to speak to that, but that was kind of interesting, adding that layer of sort of transhumanism in addition to the more than human.
That was me, Joe. I don't
Oh,
know
okay,
how
Susan,
we get our
yeah.
names to come up. Yeah.
Interesting.
I really love these contributions, and there's a difference in terminology there between multi-species and transhuman, which of course is connecting with AI and technology as well. And I just wondered how they would interrelate there. I really liked the attention of the authors here, and thanks to your presentations, to kind of mindfulness and a sense of awareness of the connections that we actually probably take for granted pretty much between ourselves and other species around us. We are multi-species and we are transhuman. So yeah, just wondered if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think it's something that I personally even struggled with while writing this story. this idea of multi-species versus transhuman. And in my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, the transhuman is indeed more connected to technologies and how human and technology is related to one another. And I sometimes think they are so entangled with one another, like technology and humans, and then we often forget that we also relate to other humans, and that we can build multi-species relationality as well, while focus is much more on technology. And so while I was writing the story, I actually noticed that sometimes while I was really focusing on building multi-species relationships, the idea of technology often slipped into the conversation. And I started off thinking, okay, let's just not do that. Let's just at least try to keep technology out. But that also felt a bit artificial in a way, to just block it out. And I think it's also interesting to have the conversation of what does technology do to this story, or like the inclusion of technology and this idea of transhumanism, for instance. And so in the end, I just let it slip through and see how this idea of transhumanism also links to or impacts how we can relate to other inhumans. And then maybe something to clarify, when I talk about other inhumans, it's not necessarily only related to animals, but it's also plants. It's also just biophysical elements like the weather or the sky or the soil. I'm taking like a bit of a broader perspective. Yeah.
Thanks, Angie.
Thank you.
There was just a quick comment in the Padlet. Someone said, Michaela's work on SpecFic is fantastic. I read her paper today and it is brilliant in the way it untangles and reimagines the conceptualization of the forms, the textual forms. And then another comment there around, I wonder how, if the voices, perspectives of other species can be heard, experience added directly rather than mediated by the human imaginary. And just with an eye on that, I think, Charlotte, you're here. Do you want to quickly speak to that? Because your paper sort of starts to get into exploring sort of aspects of writing with or alongside more than human. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought I'd just open that up for you.
I was just looking through the Padlet and then heard my name and I thought,
Sorry.
Yeah, writing with, that was Hannah Hogarth and myself. We wrote a paper where I wrote with a gecko and she wrote with a bird. And these encounters took place in schools where we were doing our PhD research. And so we really were thinking about the ways that multi-species are shaping our research encounters. And we wrote in our journals after these events. We were working with like Maggie McClure's idea of like data hotspots as well. Like there were these kind of moments that just emerged from within these research encounters that we felt were quite significant. In my case, a gecko dropped from the ceiling and fell on the floor right next to me. I'm in Bali, by the way, in Indonesia. So everything's so full of life here. It's beautiful. And that moment with the gecko really kind of stirred something within me. And then equally with Hannah, a robin redbreast bird came and sat down only when the children left the area. She was in an urban park and she sort of made eye contact with this gecko, with the robin, just like I did with the gecko. And we just felt moved by this moment. And we work a lot with sort of tiny moments of relationality between ourselves and more than humans, and wonder what this encounter really invited for all of us. And so we wrote creatively again with trying to descend to the human and trying to write with. And actually, it was nice hearing Chantal speaking to science and how a lot of the conversations about climate change are very solutionized or very technical. And Hannah and I really felt that as well. And so, we wanted to just write really creatively, but we did need to lean on modern science in order to research the anatomy of the gecko and the robin and try to think about, well, what's within their sort of sonic range? What do they sense with their sticky pads and their beaks and their wings and so on? And so we just rewrote the encounter with the robin and the gecko, and it was so illuminating for us because it really raised details in the environment that we would otherwise have just missed. And so it was a very sort of slow scholarship, slow pedagogy that we found was really generative in terms of rethinking the ways that we are always shaping moments with other species in past, present, futures. So, yeah, lots of connections to yours, Aunt Jay.
Thanks, Charlotte. And yeah, just with an eye on the clock, we'll move on to our sort of next section. So thanks, Aunt Jay, for sharing your your experiences of writing that contribution to the SI. So now I wanted to pass over to Ruben Ratchev, Joe Pollitt, and Emma Nicoletti, who will be chatting about Clouds Running Out of Juice, a special podcast episode featuring Tim Winton's climate fiction.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jo, and the three of us collectively acknowledge we're presenting this work and have written about this work on Whadjuk Noongar country. Place is really central to Tim Winton's work, and though his work is very much outside my usual reading practices, which are queer, experimental, feminist, First Nations kinds of takes, Juice had just been released last summer, and I felt it was a really interesting introduction to a new PhD candidate to this country, particularly Noongar country, Whadjuk country, to Rumen. Rumen and Emma and I had met serendipitously and talked about weather at an incidental workshop. And so I went to the bookshop, I bought 3 books, and the invitation to them was to read together, think together, write together, which we spent the summer doing. Now, this small performance podcast we're about to perform is not an excerpt from the essay, but rather it's a further iteration of this paper podcast experiment.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are diving into climate fiction and a surprisingly rich theme, the absence of clouds.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting is that we're not just talking about a novel, we're talking about a whole paper cast, a combined paper and a podcast created by 3 interdisciplinary academics, Rumen Radchev, Jo Pollitt, and Emma Nicoletti.
Right. These 3 describe themselves as scholars, resistors, and ordinary grafters. Their piece, Clouds Running Out of Juice, emerged from a collective reading of Tim Winton's novel, Juice. Together, they explore clouds, atmospheric frictions, and how critical engagement with climate fiction can shape how we navigate environmental instability.
And what's unique is that the paper and the podcast aren't separate. They call it a papercast. So while you're reading, you're sort of listening visually. It's a creative nonfiction podcast episode imagined within the fictional Sophic Generator podcast.
The episode even includes AI-generated listener responses, inhabiting a kind of a liminal space between present-day reflections and speculative futures. It's both kind of intellectual and playfully imaginative.
And what each of them brings to the table is so rich. Radchev explores atmospheric economics, thinking about how we might future-proof clouds. Pollitt brings a choreographic lens, focusing on everyday weather and lived experiences of instability. And Nicoletti interrogates the binaries between human and the atmosphere.
So, how does Juice and its papercast focus on clouds, or more interestingly, their absence? Well, the academics noticed that Tim Winton hardly ever described clouds or weather in the novel.
Exactly. That lack of description actually creates a kind of void, and it gets you asking, where are the clouds? Why is this world so different? And that questioning becomes the ecosophic object, one of the key ideas in this papercast.
So, what's an ecosophic object? Well, it's a concept from Felix Guattari where the physical, social, and mental coalesce and act as catalysts for change. Could be a news of land disappeared into the ocean after a storm while you're reading a sci-fi novel and imagining your child's future. It's anything that suddenly shifts how you see the world.
And in the case of juice, it's the clouds that aren't there. It's kind of beautiful how absence becomes presence. Now, Winton doesn't give us climate facts, no forecasts, no temperatures. Instead, he immerses us in it. You feel the heat, the discomfort, the dryness. You live in it.
It's such a clever narrative move. It makes climate change visceral. It's not abstract, it's embodied.
And then the real world parallels kick in. So the academics connect this fictional dryness to the actual deforestation in Western Australia, specifically the clearing of the massive karri forests.
And it's not just the ecological loss. Those trees literally helped form clouds. They pushed warm air upwards where it's cooled and turned into rain. Without them, less clouds, less rain, more heat.
And here's where it gets eerie. In all of Juice, the word cloud only appears twice, and it's a big volume. Once metaphorically and once about a plane flying above them.
And that absence is poignant and it reflects what's happening around us. In fiction and in fact, in WA, we are experiencing desertification, a drying of our atmosphere.
And that reminds me of that Yoko Ono quote. The sky is not only above our heads, it extends all the way down to earth. Each time we raise our foot from the ground, we're walking in the sky.
It perfectly captures that idea that we're not separate from the sky or the weather.
Which leads us to transcorporeality, a term from eco-critic Stacey Valimo. It means that we're porous beings, always exchanging matter with our surroundings. We are in the atmosphere and of it.
And back to the papercast. They chose Juice not because it's experimental, but because it's accessible. They wanted to engage with a book more people might read.
And it worked. They even bumped into a scientist who was reading Juice at the time, and that encounter particularly showed the potential for these stories to bridge disciplines and spark unlikely conversations.
The academics talk about how reading Juice felt like a shared experience. They knew they'd be talking about it with each other, and that added a layer of accountability.
And though not everyone loves Winston's style, they felt it was crucial to engage with him, because he writes so powerfully about Western Australia, place and environmental degradation.
And also because he's outspoken, like when he criticised the mining industry so publicly at the Perth Festival. His writing isn't just reflective, it's politically engaged.
One of the most beautiful insights from the papercast is the act of reading itself can be an ecosophic object.
Reading Juice actually shifted how one of the academics understood their connection to the environment. It became a personal transformation.
The kind of power literature holds when we engage deeply, it can literally change how we live and relate to the world.
And all of that started from noticing what wasn't there, the clouds. Sometimes absence opens the most profound insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, Rumen, and Emma, for your additional your I guess extension of what you were putting forward in your manuscript. Really love that. There's lots of comments in the Padlet around that. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, and we'll get to the discussion. But I know you sort of your incorporation of sort of AI and how you built that into how you were thinking through that's really interesting as well, and comes back to I think sort of Susan and Antie's point around sort of the transhuman and how we're thinking through relating to technology in increasingly sort of innovative and interesting ways. So I'd encourage you to again use the Padlet there, and then we'll have some discussion time sort of in about 10 minutes or so. But I now wanted to welcome sort of our final group of people to share their contribution with us. So this is the paper by Alison Nielsen, Sevgi Akka, Dwight Owens, Julia Jung, and Małgorzata Sus, which is What Were We Thinking? A climate fiction beginning and ending, told inside and outside and backward and forward. And we have Sevgi and Małgorzata with us today. So yeah, thank you for coming along, and I'll pass over to you to share your ideas and reflections around your contribution.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hello. So we are only two of the authors here as a representative, because the rest of our authors are sleeping in Canada on the other side of the globe. So I'm going to make a little introduction. Our starting point was taking a storytelling method, an artistic method, to go into this idea of characterizing an ocean and taking the ocean as the elder, the dancer, the creator, and the friend, but the artist and the storyteller. And then what we did was we gathered, thanks to Allison's invitation, all the authors, but it's important to point that we are all coming from different backgrounds. I'm from the arts. Gosha is from movement. And the other two of the authors were from marine sciences. So they're scientists that use artistic methods. And what we did was we started with this idea of this method of storytelling, and then we spontaneously started the story. So the system goes like this. One person starts the story and he stops or she stops, and the next person continues. We had this climate fiction and certain topics in mind, but the story was totally spontaneous. And after this row of 5 people telling the story, creating a story of Cassandra waking up one day, and she's very hot, and she pushes the blanket off. After this, we had several sessions of talking about the story that we created. And then we also showed it next to the main story as a second column. So you can read our thoughts on the story itself and the story itself in bigger titles, bigger letters. For us, the collaboration aspect was very important. What happened was we created something that we couldn't have created alone. So it's none of us, it's all together created something totally new. Yes, and it was the system, the methodology was also very new. This is all I will say. Maybe Małgosia would like to continue from here.
Yeah, thank you, Sevgi. I would like to add that I found it very interesting in the process that 5 of us that basically barely knew each other. Like we knew somehow, at least from my perspective, like we knew each other somehow. I knew Alison because she made the invitation to me, knowing me from another project where we practice together like a creative writing, somehow also related with climate fiction, but more with interactions with like water bodies. I also knew Sevgi, but but basically it was a new group, a new writing experience among 5 people that didn't do this kind of practice together before. And I found it really interesting how the story happened naturally. And it was written, spoken, and then transcribed during one short meeting. And afterwards, we spent more time on making the comments. And I think this format of having the story and then having the comments on the side allows us to have a little bit of insight on different perspectives of different authors, because the story itself is connecting very fluidly. And even myself, coming back to the story after some time, I had a trouble with understanding, oh, wait, which part was written by me and which part was written by someone else. But the comments on the side allow to have this individuality of the authors a bit more present. And also, I believe the comments reflect the different backgrounds that we represent. So, as Sevgi said before, there are scientists, there are artists, yeah. And I think that that the story itself is quite universal, so it's not placed in any specific location. But of course, also you can see some contexts that we are coming from in the story itself, starting from the name of Cassandra, which I think was it was Dwight who started the story and decided kind of intuitively, spontaneously on the name of the character. But I believe it also reflects the background of like knowing, of course, the Greek mythology and the context, the whole story of Cassandra. And yeah, I don't know, Sevgi, if you have something more.
I was thinking if we could play the
I can share the screen.
It's just to give a glimpse of the sound of the process.
Right. Hear the sound?
Knowing that each second she would become a slightly different person, and yet there was something holding it all together, which was only the flow of things flowing through her.
Because she noticed that her hair,
wet star,
which
waterfall
was
body
water,
into the ocean,
and her hair,
that
which
she
was
wanted to be
flowing
part of,
outwards,
but she also, there was something about her that she needed to tell.
She began to daydream of herself becoming a new Earth, a rescue, a safe destiny for all the Earthlings needing to migrate from their original home. Then, all of a sudden, she remembered about the burning fire in her head
and
got
the
sad.
tears,
The
were
terrifying
calling.
salt
They started
water.
to remember.
Yeah, so you could hear a little bit of our voices reading the story. And yeah, we welcome everyone to go through it in the paper.
Thank you. So again, there's the Padlet there for sort of comments or questions for Sevgi or Margosata or Joe, Rumen, and Emma. So I got about sort of 10, 11 minutes left. So Joe, did you have your hand up there?
I did. I just
Yeah, jump
wanted
in.
to, that was so beautiful to hear that collection of reading. And my question is, was that the process in terms of the writing as well? Were you writing in an overlapping document, a shared Google Doc, or was it via kind of call and response, or was it at the same kind of, a simultaneous practice?
So it wasn't written, it was spoken first. We had the ideas, we had several discussions, and then we decided to gather together and make this storytelling technique, use the technique, and then we made it at once. But then we went back to edit it and then talk about it. And it's interesting, as Gosha said, there's no, our names are, the authors aren't visible in the main story, but it seems so seamless. It flows really well.
Yeah. So were you improvising when you spoke, or?
Yes.
Beautiful work.
Well, in the trailer, it's just as a taste of it, but of course it's not on top of the words are not overlapping. It's just to give you the sense of, because when you did your presentation, I was kind of really inspired, because in these academic world, there's always written things, but there's also music of the words we write. So like spoken is a different sensation than written, and our words also have this rhythm. So that inspired me in your theatrical side of it, activated.
Well, maybe I'll sort of jump in. This is for Room and Joe and Emma. You were sort of flagged earlier. You incorporated, I guess, AI as a co-author contributor. So I was wondering if you wanted to sort of speak with that, or speak to that, and sort of how you see that maybe playing out moving forward for your work, and how it might relate to sort of CliFi.
Ruben, you take this one.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, for the question. So the AI mostly came from my side because in my PhD, I'm incorporating as well elements of the AI. Specifically for this paper, what the interesting part was kind of imagining the responses of local communities. And that's what we incorporate in the paper, how the communities will react if they were reading the paper. And it's interesting that AI, it's already shaped on public perception in a sense of the vast database it is taking. So how public opinion about a paper might seem and what is this? And then to take it a step further, I think exactly at that time in the beginning of the year, Google Notebook has emerged. I don't know if people know about it, but it's a function that you can put papers and other academic work, and it makes it as a kind of a podcast with two voices, and they can narrate your research in a very entertaining way. And it felt very kind of a special that, your work is kind of worth it to be incorporated as a podcast. And when we were discussing our paper, we were decided as well, wouldn't it be great if we incorporate some of this AI fiction into actually what is happening and blur the lines between where the AI fiction starts, where it finishes, and what we are incorporating. And in the end, I feel like it became kind of amalgamation of different voices. And going forward, probably will be interesting as AI is evolving, how it can be involved more to one degree. And on the other hand, its absence as in the clouds, in a sense of what is AI, what is not, where's our original thought, where's not, and how these lines are blurring more and more as the days come.
Thank you. That's really interesting to think about that, because AI is one of those things that everyone seems to be talking about, including sort of various institutions we're a part of. But yeah, sometimes you sort of wonder about the amount of thought that goes into that. So it was nice to sort of engage with a piece of work where that's being done in a very careful sort of considered way. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just going to say also, because as you said in your talk, the absence of something becomes its very presence. And in that sense, if, AI, as you say, is shaped by what is publicly accessible, what is within the knowledge system. So also what is absent is present there too, in that AI can't find it. So it's a bit of a circular thinking. And then I find that so interesting with both the two last presentations were both performed in a certain way. And again, there's that whole conversation around performance and absence versus presence. And I'm kind of just thinking aloud, like what can performance offer? And yeah, to kind of grapple with those sort of ideas, and even in fact creative practice research, what can that offer that cannot sort of be formed in the written word in a succinct way. So sorry, a little bit of a ramble, an excited ramble with that idea. So thank you.
Sorry, Joe, can I just mention something? I'm not a regular Zoom user, so I don't actually know where the raise hand function is.
Okay, just jump in.
Very
All good.
softly.
Yeah.
Honestly, jump in. I'm just reflecting on the last two and looking at the other paper that was put forward and thinking about the academic context in which we're working and the challenges that AI does sort of pose to that notion of authenticity and who's speaking. The second piece that we looked at there with the annotations that run alongside the creation of the work, I thought that really echoed the practice in our piece as well. It's like we did some things, but we actually spent more time sort of reflecting on what we were saying and doing as so we generated the script that forms the papercast was generated out of a conversation that we had, a quite analytical conversation about the novel, where we were sort of deconstructing what we were finding there and connecting it to our real worlds in a sort of straightforwardly typical close reading practice. But then the paper evolved in that same way. It was like, well, our voices disappeared, our individual voices disappeared in a sense when it went through the generator, when Ruman took it through that process of reconstructing and regenerating it. But what then re-emerged was the voice of the human that reflected on the practice of what we were doing, that metacognitive state, what we were actually seeing within the text, so that analytical state as well. And just connecting that back through to our roles as educators, predominantly directly in the higher education sector. I think that's what, in the age of AI, where the machine can mimic the human voice, at least to some extent, bringing that multivocal voice back, where students are starting to talk about what they're doing, the decision points they're making, why they're thinking, that we're seeing through those different ways of presenting academic work in these papers, I think for me is another really interesting thing coming out of the symposium today, when we look at those things side by side and think about the worlds in which we're working. So I just wanted to share those thoughts that were emergent during the symposium itself.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, we've just got 2 minutes left, so I just wanted to bring that to a close. So thank you everyone for coming along, and in particular for those who have sort of spoken in relation to their contributions to the SI. So I'd encourage everyone to check out all the papers in the SI, and hopefully this has potentially generated some new links that you can sort of build on new relationships and sort of expand those communities. So I just wanted to pass to Peter for the last word here.
Thanks very much, Joe, and thank you again to Joseph, Cassandra, Susan for guest editing this special issue. Please share a round of applause for them. And a huge round of applause to our fabulous authors. I know many of you are in the audience, and I really hope that you feel celebrated today, that you feel part of this wonderful contribution to our field, and that you engage with all of the great reading and contributions that each other have made. So such a wonderful opportunity. And in the last screen that I'm sharing with you, and the link in the chat, there is another special issue that's open right now in AJEE. So if you're interested in thinking about the politics of Earth system dynamics planetary justice for Earth's future and educational change, then please consider putting a proposal in for that, or share this call with your colleagues. It would be great to generate such a rich, valuable, fantastic contribution as we see here today. But thank you again to everybody. A special shout out to our reviewers. We can't be the high quality journal that we aspire to be and work towards being without our full community in play here. So wonderful to see all of us represented, and thank you so much for joining. And I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.